Our sex organs were kind of like hands or feet. They were obedient. And after that, after we ate the apple and did what we did, the sex organs to Augustine became like little dictators that we have to either succumb to or overpower.
Hi, I'm Tracy Oppenheimer for ReasonTV, and today we're talking with Eric Berkowitz, author of Sex and Punishment, 4,000 Years of Judging Desire. Eric, thanks for talking to us.
Great to be here.
What were some of the trends and patterns you noticed in how societies viewed certain sexual acts throughout the history you followed for millennia?
Quite a few trends exist by societies looking to morals laws and sex laws in order to define themselves. And very often they define themselves as not being like someone else. And very, very often accusations of immorality or perversion or sexual transgression are made against enemies. It's very common to accuse your enemies of being homosexual or being sexually perverted. So that was a common, very, very common accusation made against Muslims by Christian Europe, etc. And as the modern age dawned and as it took shape, very, very often morals laws exist as part of the sort of arsenal that governments have to exert their control over their citizenry.
And I think it's interesting you call it an arsenal. I mean, historically, why do you think governments have always wanted to be, in control of what goes on in the bedroom?
It's a variable. It's a loose cannon in the human character that I don't think a government can feel that it really has control over its people unless it has some modicum of control over people's actions in the bedroom. Religion has a lot to do with it, and also the fact that, for lack of a better word, sex is just so important. The first laws that we have written down came from ancient Mesopotamia, about 2000 BC, and the collections have been translated, and I was looking at them, and I noticed that fully a third of them had to do with marriage, sex, adultery, on and on and on. Also, of course, because sexual activity produces children and it produces lineage by which to transfer property, et cetera, that gets into property rights, contract rights, and that's the basis of civil law.
With religion and power, let's talk about original sin and how that might have played a part in just the corresponding acts of government and law.
It played an immense part. Original sin was really the creation of Saint Augustine, who existed in the 4th century AD and is one of the great Christian fathers. He and a few others are really responsible, as much as anyone, for creating Christianity as we understand it. According to Augustine, before we left the Garden of Eden, our sex organs were kind of like hands or feet. They were obedient. And after that, after we ate the apple and did what we did, the sex organs to Augustine became like little dictators that we have to either succumb to or overpower. So all creation, human creation, was to him and became church doctrine an emblem of evil, if you will. And that denial of the sexual urge, that almost criminalization of it, led toward the strong Christian aversion to the sexual urge. And here we are 2,000 years later with a legacy of sexual denial that when you think sex is bad, you make bad sex laws. And that province, the province of reproduction, family, became the province of the church. The church, after the fall of Rome, grew in power immensely and became the orchestrating factor for sex law. And I think we're still fighting it.
What are some of the other behaviors, sexual behaviors, that have been targeted over time in the cultures you studied?
Oh, there's so many. One of which is interesting always is prostitution, which has been dealt with in 100 different ways over the years, and it's now shockingly as big an issue as ever. Traditionally, prostitution was never illegal. It was taxed. It was a profession. Let's go back to Augustine and the Catholic Church. Well, I think it was a surprise to a lot of the readers of my book that the church itself was involved in the prostitution business for a very, very long time. And cities. Why? Because there was money to be made. What's the justification? Well, we need prostitutes to protect good women. The city of Florence had a city-run brothel. Back then, in the 15th century, Florentine men weren't getting married till their late 20s. That was the tradition, a lot like today. And the city set up the brothel on the justification that it would get boys interested in girls and it might keep them from becoming homosexual. So now, where do we stand? Prostitution is going on as much as ever, but it's now digital in a lot of ways, which implicates a whole new range of laws. And we now have the sex negativism of both the far right and the far left viewing all prostitutes as victims, all customers as slaveholders. And I'm not using that word inadvisingly. That word is used. And all prostitution transactions as being like trafficking. When you have the belief that all prostitution at its core is rape, and all prostitution at its core is enslavement, then you begin to criminalize the trade much, much more, and you begin to drive it underground much, much more, and you begin to, in effect, expose the women to further danger than they would be in before. We also have had very big changes in how we view children. Very big changes, and they're both good and bad, I think. If Roman Polanski, the film director, had been caught 100 years earlier with a 13-year-old girl, there wouldn't have been a legal issue at all. In the 19th century, the average age of consent for sexual activity was 12. Many states 10, some 1, 7. We also had very much lower marriage ages. So there was a lot of sex with children, as we think of them now, going on either in marriage or informally that wasn't illegal. Have we gone too far in the other direction? Yeah, I think that too. By making the age of consent 18, as it is now in California, you turn a lot of people into sex criminals who shouldn't be.
You're working on a book right now that's more related to modern times, and I'm wondering, are we approaching more the final frontier of sexual freedom?
I would have thought so. I really would have. I mean, I'm 53. I was born in the late 50s. In the course of my life, I've seen some pretty amazing things, and you would think that we would finally be reaching a point where society's concerns would turn towards more substantial things. I don't claim to be working on the most substantial subject in the world, but as the 2012 election showed, that's really not the case. We now have, in my lifetime, in the early 80s, there's a new field of law that's become a huge industry for lawyers like myself, which is sex harassment. In the workplace, that is an industry, that is a large aspect of civil litigation. Why is that? Because it makes some people quite a bit of money. With every final frontier, there's a new one opening up. So I don't think morals and morals laws are leaving the national conversation anytime soon.
That was really interesting. Thank you so much for talking to us.
It's great talking with you.
For ReasonTV, I'm Tracy Oppenheimer.